A convict saved a wild horse from a swamp. You won't believe what happened next. What makes a man who has lost everything risk the only thing he has left, a ghostly freedom, for the sake of a dying animal? Alexei Petrov did not face this question. He just heard a sound that didn't belong in this forest. It wasn't the crackle of a dry branch under a bear's paw or the howl of a wolf. It was a hoarse, gurgling moan of despair, drowned out by the monotonous buzz of trillions of mosquitoes. Alexei, who in his past, long-term life, was simply called Lek, but in his current, fugitive life, he did not call himself in any way, froze. He crouched behind the trunk of an old larch tree, blending into the bark with his ragged robe. He ran for 3 weeks. For 3 weeks, every rustle made his heart clench into an icy lump. The pursuit of Major Sokolov, the head of the Sosnovka operations unit, was breathing down his back. Sometimes at night, he thought he could hear dogs barking and distant voices. But the sound was different now. It came from the direction of the old peat bogs, from the dead bog, which even the animals avoided. Before we continue, let us know which city you are from. We're interested in knowing where our videos are being watched from. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave your rating. It gives us motivation to make new and interesting videos. Well, here we go. Driven by a strange, almost forgotten curiosity, Alexei moved towards the source of the sound. He walked noiselessly, as he had been taught since childhood in this very taiga, which had now become his prison and refuge at the same time. The smell was heavy. The smell of rotting water, peat, and primal fear. Peering out from behind the wall of reeds, he saw a picture that even he, who had seen many things, took his breath away. A wild horse was stuck up to its neck in the black, slurping window of the quagmire. Her eyes, huge and full of terror, stared up at the gray sky. Her body convulsed, but each movement only pulled her deeper into the death trap. Mud and mud were already covering her back, and only her proudly arched neck was still fighting for life. Alexei saw how exhausted the animal was. Apparently, she had been struggling here for hours. Anyone else in his place would have passed by. It's an unnecessary noise. Risk. It's suicide. Sokolov's hunters could be anywhere. But something in those eyes, in that last, desperate leap to life, struck a chord in his soul that he thought had rotted away long ago. He looked around. No one. Only the wind rustled in the treetops. He slung a skinny duffel bag off his shoulder. Inside there is half a loaf of stale bread, a knife, and a flint. All is wealth. The decision came by itself. Not with my head, but with my gut. He couldn't just leave. Alexei began to work quickly, with bestial expediency. He felled several young dry pines, working with his homemade knife and body weight. One by one, he dragged them to the edge of the quagmire, creating a kind of gathering to get closer. The swamp slush reluctantly accepted the tree, slurping like a disgruntled monster. The horse stared at him, no longer twitching. There was no fear of a man in her gaze, only a deadly weariness. Alexei got close enough to put a noose around the animal's neck, from his improvised rope woven from nettle fibers. That was his only hope. He braced his feet against the propped log, and the muscles of his back and arms, accustomed to hard work, turned to Lade. "Come on, honey," he croaked, raising his voice for the first time in many days. The rope stretched to its limit. At the same time, 20 kilometers away, in the stuffy office of the Sosnovka Colony's operational unit, Major Igor Sokolov was lazily stirring his cold tea with a spoon. His fleshy face was displeased. The goblin had been leading him by the nose for 3 weeks now. For the proud major, It was a personal insult. In front of him, huddled on a stool, was a prisoner named the Mole, a puny man with shifty eyes. "So you're saying he went to the swamps?" Sokolov drawled lazily. "He was talking, Igor Palich. Even before he escaped, he said that the places there were deaf. They say the devil would break his leg there, but he was at home." The Mole chattered ingratiatingly. "He said that there are old peat bogs there. It's a lost cause to go there." Sokolov chuckled. He hated taiga. Mosquitoes, dirt, lack of comfort. But the goblin must be caught. "Okay, Zubov, free. Go to the caretaker. Tell him I told you to give me a can of stew." The Mole bowed respectfully and slipped out the door. Sokolov walked over to the map on the wall. He drew a red pencil around a large square in the area of the old peat mines. "Well, Petrov, let's play hunting," he muttered, feeling the excitement begin to dispel his boredom. He pressed the selector button. "Car to the main entrance, and the group. We're going for a walk." Alexei did not know about the Major's plans. He didn't know anything at all, except for the pain in his stretched muscles and the desperate neighing of the horse, which, sensing a faint hope, began to struggle again. He was pulling, inch by inch. The mud reluctantly released its victim. His feet were slipping, his hands were on fire. He fell several times, sinking into knee-deep mud, but got up again. He was shouting at the horse, at himself, at that damned swamp. It was a life-and-death battle. And not just for the horse. If he stays here until dark, he will become easy prey for nocturnal predators or for Sokolov's people. The sun was already setting, turning the sky blood red, when he felt the horse's body lurch forward. Another jerk, one more. And so the front legs of the animal found solid ground. Exhausted, she collapsed onto her side, breathing heavily. Alexei fell down next to him, face down in the moss, and just passed out for a few minutes, unable to even move. He came to his senses because someone touched his cheek with warm, velvety lips. He opened his eyes. The horse, having struggled to its trembling legs, stood over him and looked with its huge, intelligent eyes. There was no terror in them anymore, just endless fatigue and something else, something like gratitude. Alexei struggled to his feet. "I had to leave. This place is too open." He patted the horse's neck. She didn't flinch away. He walked slowly deeper into the forest, and she staggered after him. He found a small clearing with a stream hidden by a dense spruce forest. That's where they stopped. Alexei examined his new companion. She was a young mare, wild, who had never known a saddle. There was a deep laceration on her leg from a sharp root or stone in the swamp. The wound had already started to swell. Alexei treated it as best he could. He rinsed it with clean water from a stream and applied a chewed plantain leaf. He built a small, smokeless bonfire, an art his grandfather had taught him. He divided his last piece of bread in half. He ate one half himself and handed the other half to the horse in his open palm. She looked at him for a long time, then carefully, with just her lips, took the bread. Alexei slept restlessly that night, but for the first time in 3 weeks, he did not feel completely alone. He named her Taiga, because she was as wild, free, and beautiful as this forest. The next few days passed in a delicate balance. He took care of Taiga. She did not leave his side a single step, warning him with a soft neigh about any suspicious sound. The wound on her leg seemed to be healing. But the calm was short-lived. On the 4th day, Alexei noticed that the taiga had become sluggish. She refused to eat and hardly got up. The leg swelled even more, and the skin around the wound became hot. He realized that the infection had begun. His taiga knowledge was powerless here. Real medicines were needed, antibiotics, penicillin, but where can you get them in the middle of the endless taiga? A fragment of a conversation he had overheard back in the colony popped up in his head. About the old, almost extinct village of Quiet Backwater, about 15 kilometers to the north. They said you could still find remnants of medicines in the old paramedic station there. It was a crazy, deadly risk. Going to the village meant leaving the deep forest for a more open area. But looking into Taiga's eyes, which were cloudy from the heat, he realized that he had no other choice. This animal, which he had saved, was now saving him from complete savagery and despair. He couldn't let her die. Leaving his horse in hiding, he set off, praying that he would not be noticed. Olga Sergeyevna adjusted the scarf on her head and continued to weed the overgrown grave. She came here, to the Quiet Backwater, every year in July, to see my parents. There was almost nothing left of the village, a few rickety houses, a boarded-up shop, and an old emergency medical center where her mother had once worked. She stayed here for a couple of days, spending the night at her parents' house. The silence was deafening, broken only by the singing of birds. Suddenly she froze. His ears, sharpened by the silence, picked up an extraneous sound, the crunch of a branch. Someone was coming from the direction of the forest, not on the road, but straight ahead. My heart skipped a beat. No one has been here for many years. She slowly straightened up, clutching a small garden hoe in her hand. A man came out from behind the trees. He was dressed in rags, thin, with a haggard, stubbly face. But what struck Olga was his eyes. The look is not of a hunted animal, but of a man cornered. He stopped when he saw her. They stared at each other for several long, tense seconds. His hoarse, unused voice broke the silence. Me? I need help. Alexei did not know what to expect. He was ready for anything. For a scream, for the fact that the woman would run or try to attack. But she just stared at him, carefully, without fear, rather with professional curiosity. Are you hurt? What is it? She asked calmly. Her voice was steady and quiet. No, not me, he replied. Mine. Friend. He has a severe infection. I need penicillin, or something like that. Olga frowned. She immediately realized who was in front of her. A fugitive. The whole neighborhood was buzzing about them. Anyone else would have raised the alarm. But she was a paramedic, and she saw in front of her not a criminal, but a man in despair. Let's go, she said shortly, and headed for the gray FAP building. The inside smelled of old medicines and dust. Olga opened an old Soviet locker. Rummaging through the shelves, she took out several ampules and a pack of syringes. This should be enough for the course. Do you know how to give injections? What is it? She asked, not looking at him. Alexei nodded silently. He reached out to take the medicine, and at that moment, Olga saw the edge of a faded tattoo on his wrist. She looked up at him, and their eyes met. At that very moment, from outside, from the direction of the only road leading to the village, came the growing rumble of an engine. Olga rushed to the window, and her face froze. Along the dusty road, raising a cloud of dust, the UAZ, a loaf with a blue stripe, familiar to everyone in these parts, was slowly driving. The FSIN car. They haven't seen Alexei yet, but they've already been here, and there was nowhere to run. The second froze, stretching into a sticky eternity. The roar of the engine became deafening. The UAZ loaf stopped right in front of the old FAP. Olga did not scream. Her face, which had been confused a moment ago, instantly became composed and rigid. She grabbed Alexei by the sleeve of his torn jacket and forcefully pushed him towards a dark corner of the room. "Over there, to the underground, quickly." "Stop it," she hissed. Alexei obeyed without hesitation. He saw an old wooden hatch in the floor, almost merging with the boards. He yanked it on himself. The smell of damp earth and mold filled my nose. Without hesitation, he jumped down into the black hole. Olga threw his skinny duffel bag with precious ampules after him, slammed the lid shut, and at the last moment managed to push the old, crumbling bedside table onto it with her foot. At the same moment, the door of the FAP creaked open. Major Sokolov stood in the doorway. His bulky figure in a tight-fitting tunic almost completely blocked the doorway. He gave Olga a lazy, appraising look. "Good afternoon, citizen. What are we doing here in an abandoned building?" His voice was soft, almost insinuating, but the softness sent shivers down my spine. Olga felt her heart pounding somewhere in her throat, but outwardly remained calm. Years of working as a paramedic had taught her not to show emotion. "I came to visit my parents. In the cemetery, I decided to come in and see where my mother worked." She spoke evenly, a little wearily. Her version was absolutely plausible. Sokolov walked into the room, his boots clattering loudly on the wooden floorboards. Alexei held his breath in the darkness of the basement below. Every step the major took reverberated directly above his head. He clutched his knife in his hand, knowing that if he was found, he would not surrender alive. "At the cemetery, you say?" drawled Sokolov, running his soft white finger over the dusty table. He went to the window and looked towards the forest. "We've got one citizen lost here. A fugitive. Petrov Alexei. Have you met by chance? A man like that? Noticeable." He turned and looked Olga straight in the eye. This was the main test. She held his gaze. "This is my second day here, Comrade Major. I haven't seen a single living soul except you. If I had seen it, I would have told you where I should go." Sokolov chuckled. He didn't exactly believe her, but he had no obvious reason to distrust her either. I was too lazy to arrange a full-fledged interrogation. "Well, look at me, citizen. Concealment is a serious article." He turned to his soldiers who remained by the car. "Look around here. Take a look at the houses. Quickly." The soldiers scattered around the village, lazily peering into the empty windows. Sokolov himself did not search the old, dusty FAP. He was squeamish. After standing for another minute, he gave Olga one last hard look and left. After a few minutes, the rumble of the engine resumed and began to recede until it completely died down. Olga stood motionless for another 5 minutes, listening to the silence. Then she pushed the bedside table aside and opened the hatch. "Come out." They left. Alexei climbed out of the basement, brushing cobwebs and dirt from his clothes. He looked at this woman with a new feeling. It wasn't just respect. It was a gratitude so deep that there were no words for it. "Thank you," he said simply. Olga just nodded wearily. "You need to go. They can come back." She quickly explained to him how to dilute the medicine and how to inject it. "Prick the muscle. Deep, twice a day. Morning and evening. If the temperature doesn't drop after 2 days, I'm not sure what else can help." She looked at him, and there was no condemnation in her gaze. Only anxiety. "Take care of yourself," she added softly. Alexei nodded, hid the syringes and ampules in his bosom, and without looking back, slipped out the door, disappearing into the forest twilight. He knew that he had no right to make mistakes now. He was indebted not only to Taiga, but also to this brave woman. The way back was torture. Alexei was walking. but his mind was working furiously. He understood that Sokolov would not just leave. The major now knew exactly the search area. Patrols will be combing the forest. He moved like a shadow, like the ghost of this forest, skirting the open spaces, listening for every rustle. His instincts, honed by years of living in the taiga, were working at their limits. He wasn't just walking. He was reading the forest. A fox had passed through here. An elk was feeding here. And this broken branch couldn't be broken by the wind. Every sign could be a trap. It was already completely dark when he reached his temporary camp. The fire was almost out. The first thing he saw in the faint glow of the coals was the motionless silhouette of Taiga. His heart sank with a sense of foreboding. He ran up to her. The horse was lying on its side and breathing heavily, hoarsely. A small tremor shook her body. Alexei touched her neck, and it was as hot as an oven. The wound on his leg looked terrible. It was blackened at the edges, and there was a sickening smell coming from it. He was too late. The thought sent a chill through him. No, he couldn't be late. He didn't risk everything for that. With hands trembling from fatigue and nervous tension, he took out the precious ampules. He lit the fire brighter. I boiled the needle in a pot of water. His hands, which could easily skin an animal or chop firewood, were now barely obeying. He filled a syringe with a clear liquid. Medicine, hope. He walked up to Taiga and stroked her hot neck. Hush, my dear. Quiet. Everything will be fine now. I promise you, he whispered. And there were notes in his voice that he did not expect from himself. The horse weakly opened its eyes and looked at him. There was no longer even the strength for fear in her gaze, only pain. Alexei chose a place on his thigh where the muscles were not so tense. He raised the syringe. His whole life, all his hope for the future, all his faith that he could still remain human, were concentrated in this small glass ampule and in the sharp tip of the needle. He took a deep breath to calm the trembling in his hands, and at the moment when the needle was about to enter the animal's skin, from the depths of the forest, very close, there was a distinct crack of a dry branch under someone's heavy shoe. Alexei's body reacted before his brain had time to realize the full horror of the situation. In one motion, he extinguished the embers with a stored flask of water, plunging the clearing into almost absolute darkness. With his other hand, he grabbed the syringe, thrusting it into his bosom. The silence that followed the cracking of the branch was even scarier. Alexei crouched down to the ground, merging with it, turning into a stone, into a driftwood, into a part of this night forest. He lay next to Taiga's hot body, hearing her ragged, hoarse breathing, and listened intently. Who was it? Sokolov's fighter? A solo hunter? A bear? A minute passed, which seemed like an hour to him. Then a silhouette appeared from behind the wall of a dense spruce forest. He was short, skinny, and moved unsteadily, almost by touch. The man stumbled, cursed softly, and turned on a small, dim flashlight. A ray of light darted across the clearing, briefly picking out the motionless horse from the darkness, and froze on Alexei's face. It was a mole. Alexei recognized him immediately. The same snitch who was ready to sell his own mother for a can of stew or an extra pack of cigarettes. In the light of the lantern, his shifty eyes widened in fright. But then there was a flash of triumph in them. He found it. He himself alone found the goblin. Major Sokolov will make him rich. And here you are, Petrov, the mole wheezed, trying to make his voice firm. The flashlight in his hand was shaking. Be quiet, Alexei hissed back, slowly getting to his feet. He didn't make any sudden movements. He looked like a compressed spring. What do you want here? The mole took a step back. The sight of Alexei emerging from the darkness like a forest spirit scared him. But greed was stronger than fear. What do you need? We need to catch you, that's what. The major promised a bonus, a big one. He tried to straighten his shoulders. So don't worry, Leshy. I'll call the guys now, they're not far away. It was a lie. Alexei felt it. If the group had been nearby, the mole would have been screaming at the top of his lungs by now. He came alone, hoping to hit the jackpot. Is the horse hurt? Asked the mole, turning the beam of the flashlight on the taiga. He saw her motionless body, heard her heavy breathing. An unhealthy light lit up in his eyes. Is it yours? Tamed it? Come on, Petrov. A sorcerer, no doubt. He chuckled. The major will like it. He loves trophies. This phrase was the last straw. The thought that Sokolov, with his soft white hands, would touch the taiga caused Alexei to have a fit of cold rage. He was still standing motionless, but the mole felt this change. He backed away, startled. Stay where you are. I'm going to scream, he screamed. But it was too late. Alexei stepped forward. It was not a step, but a predator's throw. The mole didn't even have time to make a sound. Alexei hit him not with his fist, but with the base of his palm in the solar plexus. The mole doubled over, gasping for air. The flashlight fell out of his hand and rolled across the ground, picking out convulsive images from the darkness. Moss, roots, Alexei's shoe. Before the mole could recover, Alexei twisted his arm behind his back and, using his own belt, quickly and skillfully tied his hands. Then he put a gag from his own hat in his mouth and dragged him away, tying him to a tree trunk. The whole fight took no more than 10 seconds. Alexei stood over the defeated enemy, breathing heavily. He felt neither satisfaction nor anger, just an icy void. What should I do with it now? Kill him? The thought was quick and simple. One stab with a knife and all the problems are solved. No one will ever find him here. But he looked at his hands. Those hands just saved a life. He didn't want them to take her away again. Leave him here? He will die of hunger and cold, or he will be eaten by animals. It was the same death, only a slow one. Alexei turned away. He didn't know the answer. There was no time for him right now. The taiga. He ran to the horse. She was still breathing. He found a syringe in the grass and checked if it had been damaged by the fall. No, everything was intact. He stroked the horse's hot neck again, whispering soothing words that were meant more for himself. And this time, he gave an injection. Fast and accurate. The needle entered the muscle easily. He slowly injected the precious medicine, every last drop. That's it. Now all that remained was to wait and get as far away from here as possible. This camp was discovered. He tried to lift Taiga up. Come on, my girl, get up. We have to go, he coaxed her. The horse struggled to get up, straining with all its strength. She stood on 3 legs, swaying. The fourth one, the sick one, didn't hold her at all. She took one step, then another, and collapsed to the ground with a low, plaintive moan. I had no more strength. Alexei realized that this was the end. He couldn't carry her on his back, and leaving her here was unthinkable. He sat down on the ground next to her, cradling her head in his lap. Hopelessness covered him with a heavy, suffocating wave. He lost. He was looking at the bound mole, which was bellowing and rolling its eyes angrily. He was looking at a dying horse, and at that moment, he heard something that made his blood run cold. At first, it was a distant, barely discernible sound. Then it got louder. They were voices. A few people were talking in the woods, and they were walking right towards him. Sokolov nevertheless sent a group to comb this square, and now they were on the trail of the mole. The voices were getting closer. Alexei could already distinguish individual words. Where the hell could he have gone? Watch your step, there's a swamp nearby. They were no more than 200 meters away. Escape? But where to? He won't leave without Taiga. Stay and take the fight? It's certain death. He's alone against a group of armed men. In desperation, he looked around. His gaze fell on the bound mole, and a crazy, desperate plan was born in his head. A plan that could either save them all or ruin them completely. He pulled the gag out of the informant's mouth. "Scream," he whispered in his ear. The mole stared at him uncomprehendingly. "What?" "Stop it," he croaked. "Shout that you found me. Call them here. Louder." Alexei repeated, and a feverish fire burned in his eyes. The mole, not understanding what was going on, but feeling a chance of salvation, took a deep breath and screamed like he had never screamed in his life. "Here. I'm here. I found it. Over here, ah." The voices in the forest instantly stopped. And then there was the sound of running feet. They ran straight towards his scream, right into the trap that Alexei had set up in the few seconds while the mole was taking in air. Alexei worked at lightning speed. He knew this place. A few meters from the clearing, a swamp began, masked by a thick layer of moss and grass. Not the real swamp where he found the taiga, but a treacherous, viscous quagmire that won't drown right away, but from which it's impossible to get out without help. He grabbed a knife and cut the ropes on the legs of the mole. "Run to them," he hissed. The mole, dazed by the sudden release, jumped up and, not understanding the road, broke into the light of lanterns approaching through the trees. He ran straight to his rescuers, right through the treacherous patch of moss. He took the first few steps on solid ground, and then his feet suddenly sank knee-deep into the cold, slurping muck. He cried out in surprise and pain. He tried to take another step but got stuck even deeper. "Help me!" he screamed, no longer from joy, but from animal terror. At that moment, 3 soldiers ran out to the edge of the clearing with lanterns and machine guns at the ready. They saw a mole floundering in the swamp and froze, blinded by the light of their own lanterns aimed at one point. They couldn't see anything around them, and even more so, they did not see the dark figure of Alexei, who, using this precious second, hoisted Taiga's limp body onto his back. Adrenaline gave him superhuman strength. He took a few steps in the opposite direction, into the sheltering darkness of the forest, and collapsed behind the trunk of a thick pine tree, completely hidden from the eyes of his pursuers. The fighters, swearing, tried to figure out how to get the mole howling in terror without risking getting bogged down themselves. They were completely absorbed in the rescue operation. They didn't even know that their main target, Leshy, was only 20 meters away from them, pausing in the dark and listening to the weakened heart of the horse they had saved. The night turned into a theater of the absurd. In the center of the lantern-lit stage, the mole howled and floundered, sinking deeper and deeper into the treacherous swamp. 3 soldiers scurried around him at a safe distance, shouting useless advice and cursing mosquitoes, the taiga and their hard service. None of them dared to step on shaky ground. They were completely engrossed in this impromptu rescue, oblivious to anything around them. This commotion was a saving cover for Alexei. The adrenaline that had allowed him to lift Taiga began to recede, giving way to overwhelming fatigue. He knew that he couldn't stay here for long. Sooner or later, one of them will think to shine a flashlight around. He had to move. But how? Taiga was too heavy, and he was too exhausted. He laid the horse's head on the moss, She was still breathing. Her breathing was faint but steady. Has the medicine started to work? Or is it just agony? He listened to the screams. Get the log, you idiot. Where am I going to find him for you tonight? Call the major. Report. Alexei realized that he had only a few minutes. He couldn't take Taiga away, but he could hide her. About 10 meters away from him lay a huge inversion, the rhizome of a pine tree felled by a storm. A deep, dark niche was formed under the roots, littered with dry brushwood and ferns. It was the perfect hiding place. With the last of his strength, he heaved the horse's limp body onto his shoulders again. Each step was given to him with superhuman difficulty. My feet sank into the moss, and my heart was pounding. He could feel the sticky sweat pouring into his eyes. He dragged her to the turnout and carefully lowered her into the niche. Then he pelted the entrance with branches and lapnik so that it was almost impossible to notice anything even up close. He crawled to the side and froze, turning into a shadow. Now it all depended on luck. And it depends on how quickly the fighters pull out the mole. The commotion in the clearing continued. Finally, one of the fighters, the smartest, figured out to knock down a small dry aspen tree, using it as a bridge. The two of them, risking getting bogged down themselves, pulled the terrified and mud-smeared mole onto solid ground. He was trembling and his teeth were chattering, unable to utter a word. Well, hero, where's Leshy? The leader of the group asked angrily, shining a flashlight in his face. The mole only mumbled, pointing in the direction where he was running. There, he was there. With a horse, he finally managed. The fighters exchanged incredulous glances. What kind of horse? Haven't you eaten too much henbane? They aimed the beams of the lanterns at the clearing where the mole had just screamed. Empty. There were no footprints except their own and the dents in the swamp. He's delirious with fear, the elder decided. Okay, let's get out of here. We'll tell the major that we've found this idiot. Let him deal with it himself. We'll comb through the square in the morning with a fresh head. They grabbed the mole by the arms and, cursing, wandered back the way they came from. Their voices and the light of the lanterns gradually receded until complete silence reigned again. Alexei did not move for another 20 minutes, listening to the sounds of the night. When he was sure they were gone, he crawled to the doorway. He carefully raked the branches. Taiga lay motionless. Her breathing was barely audible. He put his hand on her neck. It's hot. But it seemed to him that the fever had become a little less. Or did he just want to believe it? He sat down next to the shelter, leaning back against the cold trunk. I didn't even have the energy to make a fire. He just sat in the dark, guarding the fragile sleep of his only friend, and waited for dawn. It was the longest night of his life. He was thinking about Olga, the paramedic from the ghost village. What's wrong with her? Did Sokolov suspect her? He felt guilty for dragging her into this mess. But then he remembered her calm, confident look and realized that she had made her choice consciously. And this choice gave him the strength not to give up. Dawn came slowly, reluctantly, filtering through the dense canopy of trees with a gray, misty light. Alexei, who had dozed off for several hours in an uncomfortable position, woke up from the cold. He went to the hiding place. Taiga opened her eyes and looked at him. There was no longer that deadly gloom in her gaze. She twitched her ear weakly. He touched her neck. It was still warm, but it no longer burned. The medicine worked. Joy, sharp and pure, filled him. He took out a canteen and carefully watered the horse. She drank greedily, barely lifting her head. He understood that the danger had not passed. Sokolov will now be combing the area with a vengeance. I had to leave. But Taiga was still too weak. He decided to give her one more day. He gave her a second injection, and he began to strengthen the camp. He piled up more branches, almost completely hiding the aversion. He found a spring with clean water nearby and filled all his containers. He had to be prepared for a long journey. At the same time, Major Sokolov was thundering in his office. The report of the night group infuriated him. "Idiots," he shouted at the senior patrol officer. "He was right under your nose, and you were messing with this jerk." "A horse, you say?" So the information was correct. He's not alone. Sokolov paced the office from corner to corner. Catching the goblin has become an obsession. It was no longer just a matter of service, but a personal vendetta. He went over to the map. "So that's it. Seal off the entire square. Block all trails and exits to the river. The helicopter will be at your disposal in an hour. Comb every meter. I don't want him to be able to take a step unnoticed. And find me that paramedic from the quiet backwater. Something tells me that she knows more than she's letting on. Bring her here. I'll talk to her myself." He was sure that he had cornered the goblin. The only thing he didn't know was that his opponent wasn't just an escaped convict, but a man with nothing left to lose and who would fight to the end. The next day passed in tense anticipation for Alexei and Taiga. He hardly slept, constantly listening. Several times he heard the distant drone of a helicopter. He knew it was behind him. But the dense forest hid him securely. Taiga was getting noticeably better. By evening, she was able to stand up on her own and even took a few steps, carefully stepping on her sore leg. The swelling subsided, and the wound began to heal. Alexei gave her the last injection. The medicines are gone. Now everything depended on her own body. At night, he decided it was time to leave. It was too dangerous to wait any longer. He mapped out a route to the north, to the most remote, untrodden places where helicopters did not fly and where patrols would not poke in. It was a long and dangerous journey, but it was the only chance. Early in the morning, before dawn, he was ready. He approached Taiga. "Well, friend, are you ready for a walk?" "What is it?" he asked softly. The horse nuzzled his shoulder with warm lips, as if understanding his words. She was ready. They came out of their hiding place and slowly, trying not to make the slightest noise, moved north, deep into the boundless, wild taiga. On the same day, the UA's loaf arrived in the quiet backwater again. Olga was just about to leave. Two soldiers offered her a ride with them without further ado. To her question, "On what basis?" a short reply followed. "Major Sokolov's orders." Olga realized that this was the end. Her heart clenched in fear, but she didn't show it. She got into the car without a word. She thought about Alexei all the way. Did he get away? Did the medications help his friend? She looked out the window at the trees rushing by and prayed for only one thing: that her sacrifice would not be in vain. When she was brought to the colony and taken to Sokolov's office, she was already ready for anything. The major greeted her with an icy smile. He invited her to sit down and poured her a glass of water. "Well, Olga Sergeyevna," he began in his insinuating voice, "tell me, how did you help the fugitive Petrov?" He was sure that now she would break down and tell him everything. But he looked into her eyes and saw not fear there, but a cold, stubborn determination. He realized that this interrogation wasn't going to be easy. The interrogation began quietly, almost casually. Major Sokolov played the role of a caring investigator who just wants to figure out the situation. He walked around the office, asked leading questions, and offered Olga tea. But behind that mask was the cold impatience of a predator. Olga sat up straight, put her hands on her knees, and answered all the questions the same way. I didn't see anyone. I was alone in the village. Her calmness infuriated Sokolov. He wasn't used to this kind of resistance, especially from civilians. His soft voice was getting tougher and more metallic. Olga Sergeyevna, don't make an idiot out of me. We know that you have met with Petrov. My man saw him there. He just didn't have time to detain you. Admit it, and everything will be easier. You will go to the case as a witness, and if you persist, as an accomplice. And that, I'll tell you, is a completely different timeline. He loomed over her, trying to overwhelm her with his massive frame. Olga did not look away. I do not know any Petrov, and if your man saw something, it's his fantasy. Perhaps from staying in the forest for a long time. Sokolov realized that persuasion was useless. He changed tactics. Good. Let's talk about it another way. He left the office and returned a minute later. A mole was introduced after him. The informant looked pathetic. He was wearing clean clothes, but his eyes were still darting around in fright. Here, Olga Sergeyevna, meet me. This citizen claims that he saw you handing something to Petrov near the paramedic station. The mole looked fearfully at Olga, then at the major. Yes, Igor Palich, I saw it, he muttered. She was leaving the FAP and he was waiting for her. She shoved something into his hands, some kind of package. Olga smiled coldly. Do you believe a man who got lost in 3 pines out of fear and almost drowned in a puddle? I saw him that day. He ran past the village with his eyes bulging like a madman. He must have imagined something. Her logic was impeccable, and her tone was deadly calm. The mole became nervous. He felt that his testimony was crumbling. Sokolov, seeing this, became enraged. He grabbed the mole by the scruff of the neck and pushed him out the door. Get out, you useless piece of shit. Stop it, he growled. When he was alone with Olga again, he dropped all the masks. So that's it, paramedic. I won't play with you anymore. Or you tell me everything right now. Where he went, what you gave him, what he told you. Or you go to a pre-trial detention cell. And trust me, they'll talk to you differently there. They remember everything very quickly. It was a direct threat. Olga felt a chill run down her spine. She knew he wasn't joking. But the thought of Alexei, who might be leading a wounded animal to its death, gave her strength. She made her choice back there in the old FAP. Do whatever you want, Major. My answer won't change. Sokolov's face turned purple. He pressed the selector button. Take her away, to make an arrest on suspicion of facilitating the escape. 2 guards entered the office, and taking Olga by the arms, led her down a long, dim corridor. She walked with her head held high, feeling no fear, only a dull, throbbing anxiety for the fate of a man and a horse, lost in the endless taiga. Meanwhile, Alexei and Taiga were moving further and further north. Their path lay through windbreaks and animal trails. Taiga, though weak, walked surprisingly steadily. She trusted Alexei completely, followed him like a shadow. Her bad leg was still bothering her. She was limping noticeably, but she was walking. Alexei was constantly changing directions, confusing his tracks, using all his taiga skills. He led them along rocky places where there are no footprints, along stream beds. He knew that the helicopter was their main enemy. Therefore, he tried to stay under the dense canopy of the forest. During the day, they hid in the most impenetrable thickets and moved mainly at dusk and at night. There was almost no food. He collected berries, edible roots, and mushrooms. It was barely enough to keep up my strength. But he didn't give up. Every kilometer traveled was a small victory. He talked to Taiga, telling her about his past life, about the injustice that brought him here. And the horse seemed to be listening to him, snoring softly from time to time and bumping into his shoulder. A week has passed. They had entered a wilderness where no human seemed to have set foot. The drone of the helicopters could no longer be heard. Alexei allowed himself to relax a little. He found a convenient place to camp in a small cave at the foot of a cliff, hidden from prying eyes by a waterfall. There was shelter, water, and relative safety. Taiga's wound is almost healed. She was barely limping anymore and even tried to play by lightly nibbling Alexei's sleeve. He looked at her and felt his soul thawing, frozen by years of camps and distrust. This wild horse, saved by him, gave him back what he had long considered lost, the ability to take care of someone and feel affection. He started making plans to get to the remote hermitages of the old believers, as he had originally wanted. Perhaps they will be accepted there. He will be able to live a simple, honest life, work, take care of the taiga. For the first time in years, he had hope. But the taiga is unpredictable. One morning, Alexei woke up to a strange smell, the smell of burning. He got out of the cave. The sky in the east was covered with a yellowish-gray haze. Forest fire. Judging by the smell and color of the smoke, it was still dozens of kilometers away. But the wind was blowing right in their direction. Alexei knew what a horse fire in the dry taiga was. It's a firestorm, a wall of flame that moves at the speed of an express train, devouring everything in its path. It was almost impossible to escape from him on the ground. They didn't have much time, maybe a day, maybe two. But the fire was inexorably approaching. All his plans, all his hopes were crumbling before his eyes. He was trapped again. But this time the enemy was not Sokolov and his bloodhounds, but the relentless, devouring element. He looked at Taiga, who was restlessly shifting from one foot to the other, also feeling threatened. What to do? Where to run to? The only salvation could be a large river, which, according to his calculations, was at least 50 kilometers away. Will they make it? They went west, perpendicular to the movement of the fire, towards the river. Alexei drove the taiga, not giving her any rest. He knew that every minute counted. The smoke was getting thicker, and it was hard to breathe. The sun turned into a dim, red disk, barely breaking through the veil. The forest became alarmingly quiet. The birds fell silent. Then he started meeting animals. They were running. Moose, wild boars, wolves, foxes, all of them, forgetting about the enmity, were fleeing from a common enemy. They were running in the same direction, and it was the most terrifying sight. Alexei and Taiga joined this exodus. In the evening, they reached a small hill. Turning around, Alexei saw something that made him freeze in horror. The eastern horizon was ablaze. It wasn't just a streak of fire. It was a roaring, fiery wall as tall as a multi-story building. The fire was much closer than he thought. He was devouring the taiga at a terrifying speed. It was still a long way to the river. He realized that they wouldn't make it. Hopelessness fell on him again. He hugged Taiga's neck. "I'm sorry, girl. I couldn't keep you safe," he whispered. And at that moment, when it seemed that everything was over, the horse suddenly jerked its head, pulled him aside, and neighed. She wasn't pulling him west, toward the river, but south, toward the old, abandoned rock workings he'd seen on the map. He didn't understand why she was doing this, but there was such confidence in her eyes that he obeyed. It was as if she knew something he didn't. It was as if she was leading him to salvation. They were running. The hot wind blew in his face, bringing with it ash and the smell of burning. The roar of the fire grew louder. Alexei no longer knew the way. He just ran after Taiga, completely trusting her instinct. The horse led him confidently, skirting windfalls and dips. Finally, she led him to the foot of a large cliff. Here, among the piles of rocks, there was a narrow, barely noticeable entrance to the cave. This was not the cave where they lived. This one was deeper, bigger, and it smelled cold and damp. Taiga stepped inside without hesitation. Alexei followed her. They walked through a narrow corridor and found themselves in a huge, spacious grotto. At the far end of it, an underground stream gurgled. The air here was clean and cool. They were safe. A few hours later, a firestorm swept right over them. They could hear the roar of flames, the crack of trees bursting, the crash of falling stones. But here, in the stone heart of the mountain, they were invulnerable. They stayed in the cave for 3 days, until the fire spread further north and the ground cooled down. When they went outside, they saw a completely different world. The black scorched earth reaches to the horizon. Charred tree trunks still smoked in some places. It was a terrifying, but at the same time, majestic sight. They survived. Taiga saved him. She had brought him to this hideout that only she knew about. They walked across the scorched earth. It was easy to walk. Soon they came to the river, wide and full-flowing. On the other bank, the forest was untouched by the fire. It was a new life. They crossed the river. Taiga was floating next to a small raft that Alexei had built. They went ashore and walked on. A few days later, they came across an abandoned hunting lodge. She was in good condition. It was possible to live here. A year later, in the Sosnovka colony, no one remembered the runaway Leshy. Major Sokolov, who had failed to get a confession from Olga, was forced to release her for lack of direct evidence. His career went downhill. The Mole was transferred to another colony, where his tracks were lost. Olga returned to her normal life. But often, looking at the map, she thought about the distant Siberian taiga and about the man who risked everything to save the horse. But he lived. He lived a free life in harmony with nature. He restored the lone, hunted, fished. Taiga was always there. She became his family. Sometimes, sitting by the campfire under the starry sky, he remembered his past life, Major Sokolov, the bars and barbed wire. But those memories didn't hurt anymore. He looked at his faithful friend, who was dozing next to him, and realized that that day, by the swamp, he had saved not only her, he saved himself. He became a man again. Alexei Petrov, not Leshy. A free man in a free taiga. What do you think would be the right thing for Alexei? To stay forever in the solitude of the taiga, or to try to find Olga and risk his freedom for the chance of a new life with her?